co-founder of a company called Plan for Cloud. We're based in Edinburgh's Tech Cube, which is a startup incubator. Before that, I did my undergraduate in computer science in Robert Gordon's. I did my master's in high performance computing at Edinburgh, and then I did my PhD in St Andrews. And what informed me of my career choice, I didn't really see it as a career initially. I was, in 2009 when I started my PhD research, a bunch of startups like Twitter, Zynga, Animoto, they were using these public clouds, Amazon Web Services mainly, to build these highly elastic systems that would be able to grow from, say, 50 servers to about 4,000 servers in a couple of days. And at that time, bigger enterprises were starting to think about using these clouds, but they didn't really know where to start. So we started researching how we can help them make decisions, how we can help them forecast costs on these systems. And towards the end of my research, we actually started getting quite a lot of interest from industry, so I decided to start up this company. I did finish my PhD as well, but that was mostly during weekends and spare time, I guess, towards the end, writing up. Would I do this again? 100% absolutely yes. Mainly because this startup is by far the most exciting thing I've done so far, and the reason it's exciting is because you're so close to the action. You're working in a small team. We have a team of 10 people in Edinburgh, and your effort results in big impact. You kind of see directly what's happening, and you get to have a big say on what you're doing. In terms of the potential opportunities for PhD students who are graduating in this area, as Muffy was saying this morning, there's a big demand for software engineering, and that demand goes from companies like Amazon and the bigger corporations who are growing, but also from the startups like us who are just starting out, and they're looking for people to get involved early in the stage. The only potentially downside of that is when you're in academia, you have a lot of time to do good research, but often you need access to data. And companies have the data, but they don't necessarily share the data. When you come to industry or do a startup, you gather tons of data, but you don't really have that much time to do research, because on a small company, you're always developing the product. You're always thinking about next week or the week after, because that's where the competition is mostly. So if you're interested in being hands-on and doing the software engineering, but also maybe having some time to look at the data and kind of trying to do some R&D, then I would say there are definitely interesting jobs out there in startups. That's about it. Thanks.
Cool. So my name is Julie Williamson. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Glasgow University. I'm actually a SICSA fellow there, so SICSA is very close to my heart. And my area of research looks at interaction in public spaces, anything to do with large displays, performative interactions, things with depth cameras, accelerometers, anything that requires people to move their body in a strange way in a public space is something I'm very interested in evaluating. And so what informed my choice of my career? Since I was an undergrad, I knew I loved research, I loved the independence, I loved the freedom, I like being, for all intents and purposes, my own boss. And so I knew from then that I wanted to be a professor or a lecturer in computing science. So that's a pretty straight and clear path. You do your PhD, you do some postdoc work, and then you start applying for permanent positions. So that's why now I'm in this postdoc fellowship. It's on the pathway, hopefully, to a permanent kind of professor type position. Would I do it again? Yes, 100%. I love my career path just as much as Ali. It's a great job, it's flexible, it's all the things that I wanted. I am my own boss. I get to choose what I do during my time. I get to plan my work for the year, choose which conferences I'm working towards. And so I would do everything basically exactly the same as I did today. Someone was asking me earlier how I kind of got to this particular position. So I actually started a research assistant position when I was still writing up. It's not that difficult to find these positions. There are always short contracts coming and going in the university, and that's what I did. I took a 6-month contract while I was still writing up and started doing this research assistant position on a topic that was a little bit different from my PhD. So it was nice. It was a bit of a fresh of breath air, a little bit of a change of topic, and kind of kept my energy up so I didn't get too burnt out from the end of my PhD, which I really would recommend. So I did that for 6 months, got extended to a year, and then by the end of that, I was applying for all kinds of funding, different positions, fellowships, projects, and then this position which I got is the one that panned out and was the right kind of fit for me. And so I say that because I applied for lots and lots of things, and that's what you have to do. And this was the one that worked out and that I ended up in with a SICSA fellowship. So what are the opportunities in this area? As I said, there are tons and tons of short contracts going, and not just the ones that are already available, the ones that you can apply for. So fellowships are available from so many different organizations. EPSRC has fellowships, ERC, which is the European Research Council, has fellowships, Royal Academy of Engineering, Leverhulme, all of these places have fellowships that you can apply for today. As you're writing up, a lot of these ones are available for people who are right at the end of their PhD. So the opportunities are out there, but a lot of them are ones that you have to go out and take. And that's, for example, the position that I'm in now. It's something I applied for, not something that just happened to come along. And that's really the attitude you've got to take when you're in this middle period between having a permanent position but being a more independent researcher. So that's my little bit of advice.
Cool. My name's Andrew. I'm a senior engineer at Amazon.com. I work in Amazon offices that are in central Edinburgh. So I guess I'm representing the industry end of the spectrum. I've always worked for tech companies or tech startup companies. And looking back in my career, as this prompted me to do, I found it interesting, challenging, rewarding career. I also want to get across the idea that you don't have to choose between research and industry. One of the things that I'm very pleased about what I've managed to achieve is that although I've primarily been focused in industry, I've maintained an interest in computer science research, primarily programming language research during that time, and being able to attend conferences and seminars, and also through industrial collaboration. I've found I've managed to strike a really pleasant balance between kind of my day job and my interest in research. In terms of personal background, I studied computer science at Edinburgh University, and I've been in the industry for about 14 years. So that kind of splits neatly into the first half where I worked for small tech companies, particularly startups. I worked in an Edinburgh-based company that did medical imaging. So if you ever get injured and you get a brain scan or something, these scanners produce lots of data, and then to be diagnostically useful, you need to be able to visualize it in real time. So that company started very, very small when I joined it. It grew, it's eventually acquired by Toshiba, and it's part of Toshiba's larger medical imaging. One story from that point, our software was used in a hospital in America, and the doctor there told us a story where a marathon runner had collapsed, brought into hospital, and used the software that I'd been involved in writing to diagnose what was wrong with him, an aneurysm or something like that. And the doctor had said the speed with which he was able to do the diagnosis through the software that we had produced contributed greatly to saving that guy's life. So I think that's a really awesome thing to be able to say, that some software that I've produced has, somebody's alive today because of that. So the second half of my career, I've been with Amazon.com. So we have a development centre in Edinburgh. We have about 50 developers currently. That's growing over time. Amazon was attracted to Scotland because of its strong academic tradition, and that's been borne out by the high calibre of developers that we've been able to hire over that time. Amazon is an e-commerce company, probably seen the website, but increasingly it's also a technology company as well. So cloud computing is growing massively, and Amazon's leading the way there. Media, 10 years ago, you would have bought your music on CDs and your movies on videos and your books as sliced tree. Now this is all becoming digital, and that's a massive growth area. There's a lot of innovation. All of this stuff is supported by software systems, and these are global scale, these are distributed systems, they're highly available, highly reliable. So there's lots of technical challenges that go along with that. Currently, I'm applying machine learning to generating personalized recommendations to people, which are then shown around the internet as advertising. So this is a system that runs around the world. It deals with billions of requests every day. It has to respond to these requests in under 10 milliseconds. And so that kind of time limit makes something like a disk seek seem pretty expensive. In terms of opportunities for someone coming from a computer science PhD background, I think there's massive opportunities. Amazon, to my mind, and any tech company, is a computer science playground. If you think of your algorithms, big O notation, O of n squared, if your N is very large, if you're dealing with hundreds of millions of customers or billions of requests, that's a serious deal. And being able to trade off smarter algorithms and simpler algorithms and choosing the right engineering compromise is a big part of what we do at Amazon. You need knowledge and depth. So, for example, we care about garbage collection pauses. If we're trying to respond in sub 10 milliseconds, a garbage collection pause is a big deal. We need to understand that. So a deep understanding of computer science is really useful. And also because Amazon is kind of pushing the boundaries, tech companies in general are pushing boundaries, there are problems that we're bumping into today that didn't exist 10 years ago, that these are new problems people are encountering for the first time. So it's a very exciting time to be involved in this. We take on lots of PhD students. We have historically taken on lots of PhD students. We value the depth of understanding, but we also value breadth. We want to see people who haven't just learned stuff, but people who have picked stuff up, taken it to bits, reconstructed it in their head, who are hungry to understand things really deeply. And I think that's something hopefully we'll come back to is, what are the opportunities during your PhD so that if you choose to join industry, you're best placed to be very appealing.
Okay, I'm Andy. I'm a researcher at Microsoft in Cambridge, and I've also got a part-time professorship at Edinburgh. So I was delighted to be asked to be on this panel. And I guess my area of specialization is programming languages. That's what I did my PhD on, and I've used that in areas of security and now most recently machine learning. Actually, so we must talk afterwards. So what informed my choice of career? So I mean, I was thinking way back, when I was a kid, I wanted to be I wanted to be an engineer, and somehow it seemed like a Scottish thing. I loved Star Trek, and Scotty in Star Trek was the engineer, and there was also a TV show about Casey Jones. I've forgotten the name of it. Maybe it was just Casey Jones, it was a sort of railway thing in the States, and the engineer was called Willie, and I think he was Scots as well, or something. So I just kind of felt that was a Scottish thing, and I kind of just loved engineering and science when I was a kid. And after briefly thinking I wanted to be a sound engineer, I decided go do computer science at Edinburgh. So I did that. And then I went to Cambridge to do a PhD on programming languages, and I at that point had no idea about the commercial world. I was very academic, which I think was a good thing actually. I kind of really, I worked on quite, I think, fundamental questions. I wrote a PhD I was very proud of, though it took a while to finish it. And I was in the fortunate position where I didn't feel too rushed to finish, so I was able to postpone. It took 4.5 years to finish. And then I had a postdoc in Chalmers in Gothenburg, and I had a great fortune to have a mentor there, actually Mary Sheeran, who basically let me do what I want for a year, which was fabulous. Then I came back to Cambridge and eventually got a Royal Society Research Fellowship, which again let me do what I want for a few years. And I made it my business to sort of to network with sort of leaders in the area, so people like Martina Badi and Luca Cardelli, who I sort of looked up to, and I made it my business at conferences to talk with them and get to know them. And then I had a couple of great breaks where we wrote a couple of papers, taking, I guess, some of roughly the line of work I'd done in my PhD, and then applying it to security and also to mobile computing, papers that were really quite well cited in the end. And then that led me to join Microsoft about 15 years ago in the Programming Principles and Tools group. So that's my career. Would I do it again? I think so. I have no real regrets. That said, though, I feel very lucky. I was in a position where I didn't have to rush on my PhD. I was single. Afterwards, I was prepared to take relatively low-paid jobs at the university. I didn't have any family commitments, so I was able to sort of hang out and say postpone doing teaching. I had colleagues who went off to do lecturing jobs at the same time, and then got sort of burdened by lots of duties, whereas I was able to just sit at the university for many years before I joined Microsoft and just do what I want, which is hugely advantageous if you're building up an academic reputation, because it lets you work with the people you want to, and write the kind of papers you want to. I mean, I think that's an issue we have actually from a feminist point of view, that it's very hard for women to do that, because often they can't afford to take so long to get established careers. Men are in a better position to, have a series of contract jobs with no certainty, but in the hope of getting lucky. And I definitely got lucky, but I mean, I think other people who were doing the same things as me possibly would have got unlucky. So I think things worked out for me, but it doesn't always. So I'm not trying to be negative here, but there's a definite. I mean, any career has its risks, but our careers definitely has a risk. You know, you can get, there's some great positions and some positions that are maybe not so great. Let me see. In my current job in MSR, so I'm in a company, but we're a corporate research lab with the funding coming from the top of the company, and we don't really have to bid for funds. So we can, as far as my own time is concerned, I can do what I want, and the folks in my group, maybe they report to me, but I don't tell them what to do. They write papers on their own without me on the papers. They just do what they want. So there's enormous autonomy, which is great because you can work with senior people who know what they're doing, who've gone through PhDs and are trained up. But if you want to build up a big group of people who sort of are doing your thing, it can be harder. So in some respects, there's advantages to going for, say, professorships in lectureships and professorships in universities, because it's possible to, much more easy to build up a group of people who are doing basically what you want them to do. So it depends on your personality. I mean, I've got a respect for both styles of work, and they're different. One person fit one and another the other. Finally, I had something here about work-life balance. Would I do it again? I mean, it's a tough job. I mean, my father was a bit of a workaholic, and my mother is very earnest, and I'm also the same, and I work really hard, and I'm conscious I work like an animal in my 20s and my 30s and even my 40s. And now that I've got kids, I've slowed down a bit, but not very much, and it's a tough industry, and it gets tougher as you get older. People who are software engineers have a lot of anxiety about the kind of jobs they're going to get, in their 50s. A lot of people are expected to transition into management. It's hard if you want to stay in a technical track. Those are two separate points, but the work-life balance is a huge issue, I think, in our kind of community. I mean, academics work astonishing hours. I mean, frankly, far more than people in industry do, which is sort of strange. So that's a little bit intimidating, something to bear in mind in the academic track. But overall, I love it. I love the autonomy, and I love my career. So thanks.
Gosh, how do I follow all this? It's about bearing your soul, isn't it? I'd maybe like to start off. My PhD supervisor, by the way, I had 3, but we won't talk about the first 2. My third and final one was, he was really tough, and he was very good for me, and he taught me a lot of things about how to work scientifically. And I also remember him saying, it was quite a relief, he said, you're not responsible for setting the scientific agenda when you do a PhD. More or less, he was setting that. I had to carry it out. He said, but you're responsible for everything you do after this moment. As soon as you walk out of my door, you are determining your research agenda, and I've never forgotten that. So I think I do have to be responsible for the research I'm doing and why I'm doing it. So I do think about that a lot of the time. A bit about the choices. For me, some of the most important choices are about the people I work with. I really enjoy working with all the people I work with, I really enjoy working with. I choose them very carefully. And sometimes that sets the agenda more than the science itself, just because the whole chemistry works. So I often say research is about chemistry, and people don't always get it. It's the human chemistry with the other people that I'm working with. In terms of jobs, yeah, Julie alluded, it's a very exciting time you're at. It's a little overexciting at times. I look back and I think of all the choices I had. And I had all sorts of job interviews, all sorts of things I could have done. And in each case, I always did the thing that I just went with my heart. I just knew I had to do it. It wasn't about, weighing up pros and cons. I didn't sit there with lists. I just knew when the right thing presented itself. So, for example, I was offered a permanent, really good lectureship at a pretty good university. And I remember just thinking, And then at the same time, I was offered a 1-year, not even a lecture post at Edinburgh, it was a lab demonstrator at Edinburgh. But I just knew I had to do that job. They were so tough on me at the interview. I thought, I want those people, because they're not sure they want me. The other people thought I was too good. So I went with them. I also, my first job at Glasgow, even though I ended up being head of department and dean and all that stuff, they offered me a temporary post as well. I didn't get the permanent post. there. But I almost took it out of cussedness. I'm going to show you. And at the same time, I had a permanent offer from a university in the Netherlands that was really good. But it was my supervisor who gave me a bit of advice. He says, do you want to be trying to get back to the UK in 3 years' time? Or should you take this opportunity that Glasgow's offered you now? Because it was an exciting place, and Mary Sheeran was there. I just felt it was a place I wanted to be, so I'll take the risk on the one-year post. And 25 years later, it seems to have paid off. So I just went with my heart. One thing I didn't mention this morning, another perhaps odd choice, but I'm so glad I took it. One day when I was feeling slightly disaffected with the world, in 2001, I saw an advert in a small bit of a newspaper that said, Cabinet Office Inward Secondment Scheme for Scientists. Ever heard of it? No. So I applied. I thought, what's this? I applied. I got it now. I can't tell you what I did. I really enjoyed it. And it was just because I saw an advert and I responded to it, and I thought, I'd like to see if I could use what I do in some other context. I always had this feeling I want to do good. So I did some good, and it was great. So you just never know where these things are going to lead to. A few things about research. Sorry, I never said what my research is about. I say it's about computational modelling. It's modelling complex systems that have got concurrency and communication in them. I don't care what they do. I'm interested in reasoning about what they do. A turning point for me was I was very much a pencil and paper kind of person. I basically love moving symbols around the page. There's something very satisfying about it. And the black ink, and I've always liked working with industry, and I did a piece of work for BT. It was about a semantics of a programming language. Well, it wasn't even a programming language, it was a protocol language. And I was really proud of the semantics, and I produced this 60-page document of a denotational semantics, and they went, oh. Yeah, and that was kind of, oh, yeah. So it was the Christmas holidays, and I was a bit at a loose end because I worked like an animal then too. And I thought, I remember sitting at the kitchen table thinking, I'm going to write an interpreter for this. It was in Miranda. Actually, I started off in Pascal, and I thought, oh, geez, this is not going well. I got out the manual for Miranda, and within 2 days, I had this prototype interpreter. By New Year's Day, I had the full thing up and working. By the 15th of January, I delivered to them a prototype, so compiler for this thing, and it just went woof because they started using it, doing test cases. They came back. God forbid, I even found a mistake in my own semantics. And from that day, I've really learned the value of computational models. Actually make your maths come alive, and it convinces everyone, including myself. So that was really important. Another thing I would say, I'm not sure what the questions are, I lost them. But anyway, I was going to tell you about the bathtub test. I've had some ups and downs in my research career over the times, and I've always thought the bathtub test is a good test. When you lie in the bathtub, do you think about your problem? Your technical research problems? Think about your personal problems are elsewhere. In the bathtub, I lie in the bathtub and I think about how I'm going to solve a particular problem or what I'm doing. And if I don't do that, I know I'm working in the wrong area. If I can't go to a party and start to bore someone stupid about what I do because I'm so excited about it, or I can't amuse myself in the bathtub by thinking about it, then I think I'm in the wrong area. So bathtub test. Would I do it again? Well, in some sense, I said earlier, of course I should say no because I get to explore an alternative universe. But assuming that wasn't the question I was asked, yes, I would. But I wish I could do it with less angst. I feel like although I said I did everything followed my heart, I've always worried about, am I doing the right research? Is it the right topic? Is it good enough? Am I doing it well enough? And I wish I could just set that voice aside and just do it. And it looks like everyone else lives like that, doesn't it? But you just said you work like an animal. So... but maybe you're an angst-free animal.
No, I'm not, unfortunately.
I could do with a little less angst. And in some sense, I think age is helping me, or perhaps it's this new job where I'm so busy. I'm starting to get this feeling of, oh, heck, just do it. I don't care, shoot me, fire me. you know, this is it. This is what you're going to get, and I'm just going to do it. And I'm starting to feel slightly liberated. Does this mean I'm getting towards the end? You know? Maybe I really am going to be shot tomorrow. Anyone seen Steve Jobs' address to to Stanford graduating class? Yep. If you haven't, go Google it and see it. I think they gave some really wise words there. Don't necessarily agree with everything he did or said, although they do produce some very nice products. But I mean, his basic tenet was, don't live anyone else's life. You know, follow your heart, do what you love. And I just think, don't try to live someone else's life. Having said that, I think it's really important to watch other people and see what they do. If you like the way someone gives a talk, or the way they present an idea, or you respect what they've achieved, my recommendation is watch them. I study successful people. Sadly, I don't study them well enough, as you can tell, but from an early age, I've watched people give talks, and I've thought about what is it that made me want to listen to them. And I tried to go back and declutter my slides or present things. I remember Matthew Hennessy giving a talk about CCS early on, and I was just blown away by how elegant and simple he made it. Whereas everyone else, I've been totally bamboozled in the past. I don't think Matthew knows this. You ever see him tell him? He really made me think about what I write on a slide and what I don't write on a slide. And I still, to this day, try to follow other people. And also, a mentor, someone who sort of watched out for me in life, had said to me when I got my post at Glasgow, she says, go see where there's senior women in the university. Go watch them, go meet them, see what they do and how they've got to where they are. I'm very pleased that one of the persons I was watching was Andrea Nolan, who became a senior vice principal at Glasgow, and she's just become principal at Napier. So if I may say so, I've picked them very well. And the last thing I was going to say, you remember I said I had 3 mantras this morning and I couldn't remember the third one, how embarrassing. The third was evidence. Sorry, it was evidence, selfless and innovative. So I conclude with that.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much for the introductions. Please by all means raise your hands. The blue sweatshirts will run around with microphones.
Basically, I'm at the end of a PhD, and the thing is, I've got an idea that I hope, but it's an original idea, and I'm very excited about it. And my question basically is, in academia, I mean, is there any way right now that I could follow some steps to actually turn my own idea into the start of a career? Basically, I think I've got a very, very naive view of how academia works right now, and my idea is related to it's not directly related to my PhD work, but it's in the same field. So, I mean, I'd need to learn a lot more about the specific area first, but I mean, what are the steps? Should I make sure that I've got a very, very, very good knowledge of the area first? Should I present it as soon as possible? Should I try to become established, become a research assistant, research fellow before I try to, turn my own idea into sort of reality? Or have I got completely the wrong idea of how this sort of process works?
So Jeff, just to help out the panel, can I ask if you have an idea of whether you're thinking in an academic direction or in some commercial direction, or is it truly a wide open space and you just want all the feedback?
Academic direction.
So you're thinking academic.
Yes.
With no option for the commercial.
Well, I mean, I'm open-minded. I mean, my first thought is academic, but I'm open-minded. So. Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, I feel like a year ago I was in a very similar position to you. My passion was this public interaction, this performative interaction, but that wasn't quite the area I was working in. But it was where I had been at the very end of my PhD. That was the kind of I had found my little niche then at the end of my PhD. And I had this kind of stopgap funding, and I did, this is maybe not the best thing to say, but I did kind of what I needed to do for that year-long postdoc. But the entire time I was writing proposals for fellowships, I was writing grants, I was developing this idea into something that people would pay me to do. basically. And so then I finally got this the SICSA fellowship in the area that I had been dreaming of since I had finished my PhD. And so maybe it's not the best thing to use, short postdocs as a launch pad for your real idea, but it does work, and that's what I did, and I found my way into the area that I'm now so passionate and so excited about. And now I finally am realizing that idea at the end of my PhD, which I was like, this is where I want to go. So I think I was in a very similar position to you.
Can I say, I think that's really good advice. I think we recognize 1-year postdocs, you have to have an eye on the future. So half of it, you're sort of doing what you're normally paid to do, but you're also being paid to think about the future and to develop your future. Mm-hmm. My advice was, actually, I think you've got it, but you've got to figure out the balance. I would go out there and talk to the community, start giving seminars, because it's the questions that you're going to get back from the experts, I think, will really form your thinking. But you can't do that until you know enough about the background, right? Because you don't want to come across as you don't want to expose yourself and make it clear that you haven't done the background work. But you must have had the same issue, Julie.
Yeah.
When do you go out and expose yourself?
Yeah, basically some of the stuff that I did, I was doing my normal stuff that I was paid to do, but on the side I was running workshops at conferences, I was collaborating with people who were in the area that I wanted to work in, and I didn't have the publishing track record to be publishing with them, but I was working with them and making the contacts. I organized a workshop with them, and so people like Giulio Giacucci, who's a huge, performative public interaction guy, is my colleague, even though I didn't have the track record. I made the contacts, and now, I'm in the position where I can collaborate with people like that and start publishing with them. But it took a year to build this up from the seed of the idea that I wanted to being paid in that area, having the contacts, and doing things like running conference workshops or editing a special issue of a journal, which is also how I kind of built these contacts with these people in my field that I really wanted to be one of them. Well, I just put myself out there and started to become one of them by meeting them, by doing these workshops, just participating in anything where people would have me, basically.
And at any stage in this process, did you feel rejection or doubt or...
I don't know. The passion for the idea is what gave me the kind of, willingness to go out there and be like, no, you're going to, do something with me, or let's get something together. And I think that's always something that's going to happen. Some people are too busy, or some people are not interested, but some people will be. And the idea, if it's exciting, you need to put the passion behind it, and people will buy it. That's what happens in my situation, and I've been successful in it, I think.
Yeah, I could add to that. So I had this point in my career where I had this idea about they would have taken the sort of technical knowledge I knew and put it into a different area that I wasn't an expert in, but I could see for sure this was going to work and was going to get some attention. And I remember very consciously weighing up: do I try and do this by myself, or do I try and find a collaborator who knows the other area? And I decided. I remember sitting in the bath actually thinking about it, and I decided. This guy Martina Berry I mentioned. I knew he knew about the area, though he didn't know the idea I had. And I consciously thought, right, I'm going to take a chance and sort of give him half the idea, if you like. And we went with it, and it worked really well. And I couldn't have done nearly as good a job on my own. So I guess the advice there, or the experience was that, a sort of carefully considered collaboration with someone who knows stuff you don't know, and in particular knows how a community works, can be super valuable.
When you're in the position to want to start your own business while you're doing a PhD, how did your supervisor react to it? Were you open from the very beginning, and did it create tension, and how did you deal with it?
So what happened was I desperately wanted to go to America and do an internship in California because I wanted to see how do they do these startups. How the hell do they build these startups which grow from like 2 people to 50 people in a year? So I went there, I did an internship. When I came back, I told Ian, we're going to ditch all these prototypes because that's not a startup. That's good research, but it's not a startup. But we're going to spin it in such a way, it's a free product, and we're going to open source the whole thing, so it's still research. I can still use it towards my research, but at the same time, we're going to test the idea out by launching it publicly, not branded as a university research project, but as a product to see if people actually want to use this thing. And after a couple of months, it took off. So there was a couple of hundred users, and at that point, I was just writing my second chapter of my thesis. So I started working full-time on a startup, and the thesis just became basically my weekends. So he was okay with it as long as I finished the thesis, because I was being funded to do a PhD, not to do a startup. The tension it can create if it's related to your research is IP. And there's a bit of an issue because in certain universities, when you sign to become a PhD student, you pretty much sign your life away in terms of IP. And the ways around it is to go for a very loose open source license and chuck it on the other side of the wall and just go grab it and run. Anyone can grab it and run, so that's a big risk, but you have to be first. So there's definitely tension, but if I hadn't started writing my thesis, I would have probably not finished. Because I was so close to finishing, I decided to continue. Otherwise, it would probably have just been left by the side.
And had you been in the position, so had you started the startup sooner and not finished, I know it's difficult to reflect on what didn't happen, but do you have a sense of whether you think you'd be okay with that now, or you'd look back and have some regret, or?
So it's easy to kind of look back with hindsight, but so what happened with us was after about 6 months, the startup was actually acquired by a much bigger company in California. So maybe looking back, had that not happened, I would have probably regretted not finishing the PhD, because you've got a startup which is going nowhere, it's kind of just flatlining, it's not growing, and you've just left your PhD. So, but it's easy to kind of look back and make that decision.
But there was a bit of serendipity in that arena. Okay.
I'm kind of interested to hear your follow-up to the first question, which is when I left university, I was painfully aware of all the stuff I didn't know about business and finance and all these things, and there's a million reasons to not do a startup, and that paralysed me at the time. Looking back, wasn't such a good idea. But did you not have that coming out of?
I did. I didn't know what I was doing in terms of a startup, but the only way you can learn is try and do it. So that's what I did. The best thing I think we did was apply for Y Combinator or try and find mentors, people who've done it before. Through startups, you can find angel investors or someone who has some experience and they can give you some guidance. And there's a bunch of these incubation programs worldwide where if you can apply and your idea is good enough and you really want to do it, and they're going to ask you questions like, are you going to quit your PhD to do this thing? And you have to tell them yes, because they were going to put money in, so you have to kind of be in it. But if you're interested in the kind of, you mentioned the word startup in your question, but I wasn't sure if you see commercial value in doing it, or if you were interested in pursuing the idea in an academic career. If you see any kind of commercial interest, I would say put out a dummy version, a really crappy prototype will do, see if someone wants to use this thing. But obviously if you want to pursue it in a more academic manner, then maybe that's not a good idea.
Next question.
Hello. I have quite a few years' experience in industry, but now I'm in my first year of a PhD. So what I'm really noticing is the difference in terms of teamwork between industry work, where it's typically quite large teams, maybe between 5 and 10 people, and it's very interactive, lots of meetings, and incremental work, where we're all working together to a single end product. But now as a PhD student, it's very much individual work, although I'm working in a kind of team with my supervisors, it's a very different kind of teamwork. I'm wondering how that is going to change over the course of my PhD studies, and then also if I were to stay in academia, what is the teamwork situation going to be like? Because I missed that from industry.
I'm happy to respond to that if nobody does.
I'll make a first response. I can imagine it's quite a shock. Yeah, as someone who's gone into industry and also in government, very much team working there. And academia is almost based around prima donna behaviour and recognition. Although there's an increasing trend to big projects and big science. Computer science is changing. For example, 30 years ago, nearly every paper was single-authored. Single-author paper is extremely rare now, so there's much more team working. But I think in a PhD, I really personally feel it's still really important. It's your individual work, and there's no getting away from that. And you have to be very clear, even though you're working in a project and in a team and with your supervisor, it's your personal mission. It's your individual PhD. That will change after you graduate from a PhD and then become a researcher. I don't know if the others want to say, but I think you need to be very careful to make sure that you carve out your PhD.
So, even though I'm not on the panel, I'm going to, having just been through this not too long ago, I'll tell you a couple of rather personal stories that I've shared with one or two people in the room in the past that might be helpful here. And the first was, I, like you, had to do a PhD where I genuinely wanted to go out and work with other people, but my supervisor said, no, you're in your cubicle and you keep your head down. And so the downside is, of course, that may be less enjoyable to some people. The upside is, in some sense, that when you finish whatever work you manage to complete, whatever successes you have, by and large are going to be yours. And there is a sense of delayed pride, I think, in that process. Okay? So part of it is making clear to others that it's yours. Part of it is learning on your own. But part of it is also having the sense that when you're done, you can take ownership of it. Okay? So the second part of this story, I took time away from the tail end of my PhD to take care of my father, who was sick at the time. And in his last hours, his best friend showed up to say a few words and converse, and his best friend showed up 90 minutes too late. So, just Dad had lost the ability to speak. And so he had asked me, having seen me at different points in my life growing up, how are you, how are studies, and so on. I said, things are fine, can't complain. I'm really, though, he said, how's the research going? I said, it's all right, but I'm not sure I want to pursue a career in academia because a lot of what I see, I'm not sure I like. This is, of course, in the context of having had work independently. And he said to me something I will never forget. He said to me, your father, who was a chemical engineer, worked in industry for about 12 years and then moved into academia, said, how your father got work done? What made your father a successful researcher? What his unique talent was? And I said, honestly, I couldn't tell you. I know he's done good things, but that's the limit of it. He said, your father wasn't necessarily a genius in any capacity, but he was uniquely able to disseminate information to people he thought should have that information, and to put people in a room to communicate the information that they had. So he, in some sense, the person telling the story, it was the first example that I had that research doesn't have to be an independent affair. It is, in effect, what you choose to make it. So some people will do the head at the paper and do really well, and there is space for others to do the team-type thing that you're talking about. So don't be constrained by the view that you have now. Okay, so this is a necessary evil in the training process, but I think once you're out independent, your life is yours in some sense to define. Is that fair from the experts on the panel? Yeah? I don't know if that was helpful or not.
Yeah, I've got an interesting kind of perception difference because working full-time in industry, I work with the team day in, day out, and I work with people in the company. But to my mind, working in academia, you've got a lot more opportunities to meet people very widely at conferences. And I think that's something that if you're thinking during your PhD, you might be going into industry, is a real opportunity during these periods, these years of your life, to make the contacts, just talked about earlier, to meet the people, and particularly, the key people, the important people that you come across in your life, because that will be useful throughout your life. So I think making the most of the time in academia to make these connections is really important.
Also, no one's ever going to pay you again for 3 years to sit quietly at a desk and think. You may have too much time to think, but one day you're going to look back at that and think, wow. so I'd say,
It's not all bad.
Yeah, enjoy.
Actually, that's one of the things that I wanted to convey as a kind of a life tip. At every point in my life, I've thought, there's a bunch of stuff I'd like to do, but I don't have enough free time. Someday when I have enough free time, I'll do all these cool things. It only gets worse. The amount of free time you've got goes down and down and down. So you may as well do it early on. It's not going to get better.
Enjoy it while you've got it. Are there any other questions from people in the room?
Okay. I will extend the same question. I would say rephrase it the same question. For example, before I am in the first year of my PhD, and before that I was working in the industry, and the same question that you were working in a team, and now wouldn't say I'm working independent, but still in a kind of team, but it's different. And as Julie mentioned that the researchers are mostly works in a bit flexible way and independently. So how do you think, for example, a person who completed their PhD, who has, like we can say, this feeling of being flexible, more flexible and stuff, when he joins industry after PhD, so how do you think, Andrew, that will they fit in the team again? Because you have to follow certain company policies, you have to work around like 9 to 5, 9 to 6 or something. So would you observe some kind of these kind of difficulties with working with PhD employees in your company? Maybe Ali, you can also, because now you are in an industry setup, previously you were working in a very flexible environment.
Would I hire PhDs in our team? Definitely, yeah. Would I hire all PhDs? No. Because you still need engineers who can take direction and just execute. But you also need people who can think ahead of the rest of the team. And those are the kind of positions that would probably suit PhD students. Because you have a team and you can use it to bounce ideas and you have access to really interesting data, but you're given free time to think and you don't have to just stand up every morning and say, what did you do yesterday? If you can find something like that, take it.
Okay, so I'm going to ask two hopefully quick questions, and then we will press forward. So the first one, I remember reading as a PhD something that said, successful research, if you divide your time between your activities, you will actually spend only 10 to 15% of your time doing actual research and 80 to 85% of your time trying to communicate that research to the outside world. Do you have a feeling one way or the other as to whether... So there's an element of your research only goes so far as other people can understand it. You can convince them to fund it and so on.
I think that's too simplistic, because increasingly I find when I communicate what I'm doing, I'm learning about and understanding more deeply what it is I'm doing. I can't quite separate out the two. And the same goes for teaching. There is nothing sharpens the mind like standing in front of 300 students and writing on the board and thinking, how did that argument go again? So I used to think maybe that was the case. I don't believe it anymore. I'm sorry. I'd say it was almost more a wee bit 50-50. But communication is part of the understanding, deep understanding process.
I mean, another point is that usually, acts of formal communication are good deadlines. For example, you've been told you've got to speak to the group at Monday lunchtime about your current research, which is an act of communication. But the process of thinking about what you're going to say and understanding it is the research. And in fact, talking about your ideas in front of others and seeing which ones get a positive response and which ones don't is also I think part of the research, or at least influencing the decision about what to research next.
And lastly, one I've always been curious about, so can you have it all? And I ask this because, I think of my parents who grew up in an age, women especially, where they were told and taught, you can have it all, you just have to work for it, anything you need, it's within grasp. And somebody recently who used to walk around saying you can have it all has now turned back in her 70s and said, actually you can't. And I wish somebody had told me sooner. You can have anything you want, but something has to give. Is that true? And do you need to decide sooner rather than later?
I'm going to just say from my limited experience of doing this year's startup, you can't have it all when you're doing a startup. The work-life balance is non-existent. There is no balance. It's a startup. Because if you don't do it, there's no one else who's going to do it, especially early on when it's just a couple of you. Because if it's working, it's probably because you're doing something right, and if it's not, because it's not, you're doing something wrong or you're in the wrong market. But I'm increasingly finding as the team grows and the startup stabilizes, you try and balance it out a bit more. So maybe you can after a couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that there is the work-life balance isn't a very easy thing to achieve, and I think it was something interesting, Andy, that you mentioned earlier, that during your early part of your career, being single was actually a really helpful part of that. And I can relate to that because I recently, well, about a year ago, got married, and actually I do notice the difference in my work-life balance, and it changes. I mean, obviously you can't say, oh no, I'm not going to get married, I'm not going to meet anyone. It just happens. You can't control it. But it does change how you work, the amount of hours you're willing to put in, and how you define your work-life balance. And I think I work a little bit less now, even though I'm at a very crucial part in my career. I'm not going to put in the crazy amounts of hours. I want to go home and spend time with my husband. I'm not going to give that up. And I think that's something that a lot of people find difficult to choose one way or the other, but you do have to choose, I think.
I think there's a lot of decision points throughout your career, and I used to stress a lot about them. I wanted to make the right decision and be paralysed by the fear of possibly making the wrong decision. I think as time has gone on, I've realised that most decisions, they're not permanent. Some are reversible. I've made decisions which were sort of wrong at the time, but actually it's turned out to be fine. And I think if I'd spent less time fretting about the danger of making a poor choice and just gone on ahead and bounced along, things would have just been fine, and we would have worried less.
The recurring theme of angst here is
And any last positive comments, words of advice very quickly from anyone in the room before we press forward?
I have one. So this guy Mike Burrows, who ended up getting an FRS recently, and he's at Google now, and he invented Alta Vista and lots of amazing things. And I was in the same room as him when I started my PhD in Cambridge, and he gave me this advice, which is invite yourself places. I didn't believe him. He said, yeah, if you go to America and you have a paper, write to people you know at universities, you know, in your subject, and say, I've got a paper, I'd like to come and give a talk. And the amazing thing is that they have money, and they'll pay they'll pay for your hotel. They'll maybe fly you from another city to where they are. Maybe they won't pay your transatlantic flight, but you know it's easy for them to pay that. And they might even give you a check as an honorarium. So I had a paper so I took his advice, and I had a paper at a conference in Boston after I finished my PhD, and I organised this lecture tour around the States and Canada. And I got everywhere. I got up to Calgary and Vancouver and San Francisco. I went to Bell Labs. I went to University of Chicago. Blah blah blah. And I didn't pay for any of it. And I made a slight profit. And you know, British universities tend not to do this, you know. But I just put yourself forward, you know. And people will, you know. There's an amazing receptiveness to people who put themselves forward. And it's a great way of establishing your network.
Yeah. Kind of to agree with that, I think. Availing yourself to serendipitous events is great. If I look back of events I've been invited to talk at, and I think, why did I get asked to talk at that? And it's because I went to this other thing, and I bumped into this person, and they passed on to this. And you look back, you can never plan that, you can never deliberately created it. But by being out there and taking the opportunities as they come, it'll lead to one thing, that will lead to another. You bounce around, and then some of the best life opportunities come from these things that you could never have pre-planned.
And always bring the paper with you. Always have the paper to hand them at the end. Oh, and here's the technical paper.
So always have copies of your work on hand to show.
Absolutely.
Very good.
Or a demo.
Yeah, or a demo, yes.
Are you saying at the end of the talk, or just when you're at a conference?
Oh, both. Carry them with you at all times.
Very quickly.
You are an animal.
Just relating to that, is there any intellectual property rights connected to handing out your own paper? I mean,
personally, I don't care. I'm delighted if someone wants to rip off my ideas or use it. No, I'm actually serious. Sure, I'm speaking as an academic, but I'm delighted if someone wants to take my work and build on it.
It's just I thought that you sort of handed over your paper to the conference, and then it was up to them what they did to it.
No, I think there's an element of making sure that your work is, when you have the opportunity to share your knowledge with other people, you take it. And it's not you're not trying to push a product on these people. You're not trying to collect from them. It's just sharing what you know, making sure others know it too. Okay. Yes. So we could thank our panel.